Ah, the deep state. It lurks in the shadows, a whisper on the wind, a chill down your spine.
Well, now, some folks say it's just a bunch of bureaucrats pushing papers and sipping coffee.
Deep state? What, like it's some kind of discount supermarket? Fugged about it. It's all a load of malarkey.
The deep state. It's the stuff of spy novels, conspiracy theories, and late-night talk radio rants.
My granddaddy always said, there's more to a frog than what hops on a lily pad.
Look, I'm from Philly, we invented shady dealings. But even I gotta draw the line somewhere.
Well, whether it's real or imagined, the deep state has become a hot topic. So what exactly is the deep state? It's a shadowy cabal of unelected officials, they say, pulling the strings from behind the scenes.
They say these deep state folks, they're like ghosts.
Ghosts with pensions and government health care. Don't believe everything you hear, folks.
We'll separate fact from fiction and try to understand why this concept has captured the imaginations of so many. Our journey into the heart of the deep state begins not in some smoke-filled room in Washington, but on the sun-drenched shores of Turkey.
Now, Turkey might seem a fur piece from our neck of the woods, but that's where this whole deep state business got its start.
Exotic, sure, like a bad kebab after midnight. Look, Turkey's got a long history of military coups, political intrigue, and enough shady characters to make a Scorsese film jealous.
Indeed, in the latter half of the 20th century, Turkey was rocked by a series of military interventions, often justified as necessary to protect the secular order from perceived threats. From the bustling streets of Istanbul, we travel north to the chilly heart of Russia.
Now the Russians, they've always had a way with secrets.
Don't forget borscht and complaining. But seriously, after the Soviet Union collapsed, everyone figured democracy was going to break out like a cheap sweat.
Siloviki, a chillingly vague term referring to individuals with backgrounds in the security services, intelligence agencies, and the military. So far, our deep state safari has taken us from the minarets of Istanbul to the onion domes of Moscow. But this shadowy concept wasn't content to stay confined to the far corners of the globe.
You see, the deep state, it's like kudzu. Once it takes root, it's hard to get rid of.
Hey, don't go blaming the South for everything. The deep state's gone global. From the halls of Parliament in London to the Bundestag in Berlin.
As the 20th century drew to a close and the world grappled with new uncertainties, globalization, terrorism, economic upheaval, the allure of the deep state grew stronger. All right, folks, let's get down to brass tacks. If this deep state is as pervasive as some claim, how the heck does it actually operate?
Well, now, I wouldn't know about no handbook. But I reckon the deep state's first rule is probably don't talk about deep state.
Yeah, and rule number 2? Deny, deny, deny. Even if you're caught red-handed with your hand in the cookie jar, just blame it on the intern.
The deep state's supposed MO relies heavily on its alleged ability to operate outside the normal channels of accountability. Secrecy, my friends, is the deep state's best friend. It's the invisibility cloak that allows them to move unseen, to whisper in the ears of power, and to manipulate events from the shadows.
It's like trying to nail jelly to a tree, trying to pin down the deep state.
And if you do manage to find a paper trail, it leads right back to, you guessed it, the deep state.
Of course, a healthy dose of skepticism is always warranted when it comes to claims of shadowy cabals operating in the dark. One of the most enduring aspects of the deep state mythos is the idea that it represents a kind of permanent, unelected government, answerable to no one and beholden to no ideology.
They say the deep state, it's like the Mississippi River. It just keeps rolling along no matter who's president or which party's in charge.
Critics argue that this notion of a permanent, shadowy elite ignores the very real ways in which power changes hands in a democracy. And here we arrive at the crux of the deep state debate, its alleged influence on government policy.
They say the deep state's got its tentacles in everything, from the price of grits to whether the Cowboys win on Sunday.
Hey, leave the Cowboys out of this. The only conspiracy there is Jerry Jones's hairpiece. Fly, Eagles, fly.
But attributing complex policy decisions solely to the machinations of a shadowy elite often overlooks the myriad other factors at play. All right, folks, it's time to venture into the shadowy realm where history meets paranoia, where whispers of conspiracy fill the air like the smell of week-old coffee.
Now, I'm not saying I believe everything I hear, mind you, but where there's smoke, there's usually a fire.
Fair enough, but whether you're a die-hard believer or a hardened skeptic, there's no denying the deep state has become a favorite villain in the ever-expanding universe of conspiracy theories. Let's rewind the clock to November 22, 1963, Dallas, Texas. President John F. Kennedy, young, charismatic, full of promise, is gunned down in broad daylight.
Now I remember that day like it was yesterday. A real heartbreaker. And the more you learn about it, the more questions you got.
The Kennedy assassination remains a fertile breeding ground for deep state theories. From the tragic to the downright bizarre, the deep state's rap sheet reads like a greatest hits compilation of conspiracy theories. Alien cover-ups? Check. Political scandals? Double check.
Spin a yarn? They could give Shakespeare a run for his money with some of these stories.
While it's tempting to dismiss all conspiracy theories as the ramblings of the paranoid and the delusional, it's worth remembering that sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction. Okay, so we've established that the deep state has a certain, shall we say, reputation when it comes to conspiracy theories.
Well, as my mama always said, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck wearing a disguise.
Easy for you to say. You live in a place where the biggest mystery is what kind of pie they're serving at the church social.
That's a fair point, but even in the concrete jungle, even in the age of disinformation and deepfakes, there are ways to cut through the noise and get closer to the truth. It requires critical thinking, a healthy dose of skepticism, and a willingness to follow the evidence wherever it may lead. Across the pond, the land of the free and the home of the brave was grappling with its own deep state awakening. But this wasn't your granddaddy's Cold War-era conspiracy theory.
Now, we Americans, we like to think we invented everything, from the light bulb to the internet.
Borrowing, we perfected it. We took this deep state thing and supersized it, gave it a Twitter account, and turned it into a reality TV show.
In the United States, the deep state took on a distinctly American flavor, often portrayed as a cabal of unelected bureaucrats, intelligence officials, and shadowy billionaires working to undermine the will of the people. As the 21st century rolled on, the deep state became a favorite punching bag for politicians of all stripes, a convenient scapegoat for everything from policy failures to embarrassing scandals.
It's like a game of political hot potato, this deep state business.
It's like a game of whack-a-mole. You never know where it's going to pop up next, but you can bet someone's going to try to smash it with a gavel or a subpoena.
On the right, the deep state was often painted as a bastion of liberal elitism, determined to thwart the will of the conservative heartland. The rise of populism, both in the United States and abroad, breathed new life into the deep state myth. Populist leaders, often campaigning on platforms of anti-establishment fervor, found a convenient foil in the shadowy, all-powerful boogeyman of the deep state.
Now, I understand folks being frustrated. They feel like the system's rigged against them, that the little guy don't stand a chance.
By tapping into this deep-seated mistrust of institutions, populist leaders were able to rally their base and present themselves as the only ones brave enough or crazy enough to take on the deep state and restore power to the people. But while the deep state might make for a compelling narrative, critics warn that this kind of rhetoric can have real-world consequences, eroding trust in institutions, fueling polarization, and undermining democratic norms.
Now, I'm all for holding our leaders accountable, but when you start accusing everyone you disagree with of being part of some shadowy cabal, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, next thing you know, we'll be burning books, wearing pointy hats, and accusing our neighbors of being lizard people. Oh wait, some folks are already doing that.
The danger, critics argue, is that by constantly invoking the specter of the deep state, we risk normalizing conspiratorial thinking and creating a climate where evidence and reason take a back seat to fear and suspicion. The deep state sure does seem to have a knack for staying hidden. It's like trying to find a sober Irishman on St. Patrick's Day.
Absence of evidence ain't evidence of absence. Sometimes you gotta trust your gut.
Your gut? You trust your gut? Lady, your gut probably thinks a Big Mac is health food.
Critics argue there's a distinct lack of actual evidence. Another criticism leveled at the deep state theory is its tendency to overreach, to see conspiracies lurking around every corner like pigeons in Central Park.
Well, I always say, if you're looking for trouble, you're bound to find it. But sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, you know?
Yeah, and sometimes a rat is just a rat, even if it is wearing a tiny little fedora and carrying a briefcase full of classified documents.
Critics argue that by attributing every setback, every policy disagreement, every instance of government incompetence to the machinations of the deep state, we risk losing sight of the more mundane and often more accurate explanations. Bureaucratic inertia, political maneuvering, good old-fashioned human error. And finally, we can't ignore the cynical way in which the deep state concept has been weaponized by some politicians, particularly those with a penchant for populism and a talent for sidestepping accountability.
It's like a magic trick, this deep state business. Politicians, they pull it out of their hat whenever they need to distract folks from their own shortcomings.
It's the oldest trick in the book. Blame the deep state, blame the media, blame your intern. Heck, blame it on the ghost of Jimmy Hoffa for all I care. Just don't expect me to believe it.
By blaming the deep state for their own failures, these politicians can deflect criticism, sow distrust in institutions, and further polarize the electorate. It's a dangerous game, one that undermines faith in democracy and erodes the very foundations of a functioning society. So where does that leave us? Is the deep state a real and present danger to democracy? Or is it a figment of our collective imagination, a convenient scapegoat for our anxieties about power and secrecy?
Now, I'm not saying I got all the answers, mind you, but I do believe there's more to this world than meets the eye. And sometimes the best way to fight the shadows is to shine a light on them.
Look, I've seen enough corruption and double-dealing in this town to last a lifetime, but I also know that Occam's razor, the simplest explanation, is usually the right one.
Ultimately, the deep state remains an enigma, a Rorschach test onto which we project our own fears and beliefs.
Know you've been a good friend, and that's in the thick and thin.
Well, folks, we've journeyed deep into the heart of the deep state, explored its shadowy origins, dissected its alleged modus operandi, and emerged, blinking into the harsh light of day. So what have we learned?
I reckon it's like Mama's pecan pie. A little bit of truth, a whole lot of sweetness, and a whole heap of nuts mixed in for good measure.
You're telling me. This whole thing's been a recipe for indigestion, if you ask me. Too much speculation, not enough antacids.
The deep state, it seems, is a slippery fish. For every compelling anecdote, there's a healthy dose of skepticism. For every alleged smoking gun, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation rooted in the messy realities of government bureaucracy and human nature. But even if we acknowledge that the deep state, as it's often portrayed, might be more myth than reality, that doesn't mean we should simply shrug our shoulders and ignore the very real concerns that fuel these beliefs.
Just because you can't see the fish in the water don't mean they ain't there nibbling at your toes. Sometimes you gotta cast a wide net and see what you pull up.
And sometimes you gotta know when to cut bait and find a new fishing spot. Look, I'm all for keeping an eye on the government, but let's not go chasing after every shadow and whisper.
Finding the right balance between healthy skepticism and blind cynicism, between holding power accountable and succumbing to paranoid fantasies, is crucial. It's a delicate dance, one that requires vigilance, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage in nuanced debate. In the end, the deep state debate reminds us of a fundamental truth. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires active participation and skepticism towards those in power.
My granddaddy used to say, trust is earned, not given. And that goes double for folks in government.
So, the next time you hear someone whispering about the deep state, remember this. There's power in asking questions, in demanding transparency, and in holding our leaders accountable.